Whenever you distract yourself with something, now your background process isn't just like, oh, what's going on my phone? It's like this thing I have to do, and then another program that's like, oh, I'm not doing it. I feel a bit guilty. Oh, I should probably do it. The programs kind of like multiply. It's like that the dragon in the Greek myths where you cut off one
Oh, the
head and it
Hydra.
comes back. The Hydra, yeah, 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 and it comes back with like multiple heads. That's how procrastination's like. You avoid one task, and then the thing you're avoiding comes back with like three heads. And next thing you know, you're like, what have I done? If you ever struggle with procrastination, a lack of productivity, getting in your own way, or in other terms, self-sabotaging, or maybe even being confused in terms of what you want out of life, taking one step forward and two steps back, this episode is for you. All of this are symptoms of ignoring your internal world and not understanding what you actually want. When you heal these beliefs, like we'll talk about in today's podcast, what you allow yourself to do is to be more productive, to get more out of life. Because instead of having 10 different programs trying to take you in 10 different directions, you have one efficient program. In today's episode of the Data Driven Actualization Podcast, we talk about the cost of ignoring your internal world and how you can take actionable steps to make sure you can reduce those costs and build a better, peaceful relationship with your own mind. I hope you enjoy this episode. Drop a like, drop a comment, and thank you for giving us your attention and your time. Welcome to the Data Driven Actualization Podcast. This is Ege. I am here with.
Mr. Numer, who still has no last name or any idea which episode we're currently on.
That's right, because the episodes keep flowing. And today we are going to talk about the hidden cost of ignoring your inner world and how this ties down to the problem of procrastination. If you're someone who thinks, oh, maybe I'm just lazy or I have difficulty completing tasks, or even for people who may think, like, oh, I can concentrate, maybe I should go to the doctor and see if I have ADHD. Like, it's normal, we're living in a world with so many distractions to be distracted because that's the default course of action. Like when you have a phone with notifications from hundreds of apps, and then you have a computer with 20 tabs open, like no one's going to have that in their environment and be able to focus on one tab at a time. And I think a lot of people kind of take that experience personally and go, wait, what can I do about this? Am I supposed to just keep procrastinating and keep being lazy? So today we're going to go into that, share our thoughts, maybe share some stories, and tell you how you can heal to be more productive rather than seeing this as a strategy problem. How do you actually fix the root cause so that focusing becomes your default?
Yeah, and this is one that's I'm quite excited about as well because the same theme has been coming up in different aspects of my life as well,
Hmm.
of procrastination being really the task that I need to do is something I don't want to do, so I'm going to find other things to do in its place. Or even this idea of at the end of the day, when I ate a lot of food or then ate a lot of unhealthy food, it really was I wanted to make my internal world feel better. And
Hmm.
actually, when I could make my internal world feel better, I stopped relying on eating a whole pizza as a coping mechanism or to make myself feel better. And also, this has been coming up repeatedly in conversations we've had around, you know, having so many mental processes running that
Hmm.
it makes people feel anxious and that negatively affects their ability to focus on the task at hand. And, that only kind of propagates the vicious cycle of, well, you can't focus on the task at hand. So then the task at hand doesn't get completed on time. And then that becomes another mental process that's running in your background. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of kind of working through mental processes and slowly shutting the ones down and having, a core set of minimal number of mental processes running at a given
Mm-hmm.
time, it's just expanding, expanding, expanding until you're just like, oh, I'm going to explode.
That's right. Yeah, it's very similar to, in a computer, there's lots of processes that kind of just run in the background. And sometimes you're on Google Chrome and you just open too many tabs and the computer starts slowing down. And I think the mind works the same way, right? Because a lot of people, like usually, we're doing these research calls and really talking to people about their problems. And one of the things that came up, like you said, is people wake up, and the moment they wake up, the distraction cycle begins. It's like, oh, check my phone, see what's happening on Instagram, see what's, maybe go to Reddit, scroll there for a bit, maybe even go read a Medium article. This cycle can look very productive. Oh, let me just check some TechCrunch, see what's going on. Or there's this like Brew newsletter that I like to read a while back. So it can feel very productive. But what matters is this intentional? Are you actually choosing to check Instagram because you have a purpose to message a friend or to check in with someone? Or is this actually just a default behavior that's allowing you to avoid the current reality? So most people wake up, check their phone, that's a default, then maybe hop straight into work or maybe make some breakfast and then get to work. And the cycle is, at work, especially if you're in tech and you're in engineering, sometimes you're going to have difficult tasks. Sometimes you're going to have a bug that just keeps coming back and you think you fixed it, but it wasn't fixed. And, that's what you get paid the dollars for. This is the hard work you signed up for. And I think a lot of people in that situation find it easier to go, oh, let me check my phone and see what's going on. And that context switching makes it a lot more difficult to be with the task at hand and actually finish what they're doing on time. So, a lot of the time in one day, the cost of this is not very apparent to the person doing it. They might just think, oh, I'll just stay 30 minutes extra for work. But in a span of weeks and months, this could be the reason someone has low energy because they keep pushing tasks back. And whenever you distract yourself with something, now your background process isn't just like, oh, what's going on my phone? It's like this thing I have to do. And then another program that's like, oh, I'm not doing it. I feel a bit guilty. Oh, I should probably do it. The programs kind of like multiply. It's like that the dragon in the Greek myths where you cut off one
Oh, the
head and it
Hydra.
comes back. The Hydra, yeah, 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 and it comes back with like multiple heads. That's how procrastination's like. You avoid one task, and then the thing you're avoiding comes back with like three heads. And next thing you know, you're like, what have I done? And in a span of months, that really affects someone's life because that could be the reason you get passed up on a promotion. That could be the reason you can't make time to spend with friends. That could be the reason you can't make time to go to the gym. Like people always say, oh, I don't have time for that. And usually it's either it's not a priority or they don't have the energy. Because what I've seen from my experience is when you let go of procrastination and when you shut down all these unproductive programs and you have one program, you actually have a lot of time. And you can pick the thing you want to dedicate that time into. Whereas a lot of people, they say they don't have time, but what's taking up their time isn't necessarily productive habits. It's these efforts that's kind of like leaking in their memory and in their energy that's like thinking about all this stuff. Their time is spent thinking and not actually doing or being. which is the core of the problem.
Yeah. And it's actually, the more I became aware of this, the more I realized, even in a short term, how much like this propagates the problem through other parts of life. So, for example, I realized that, let's say I procrastinated one day, that would often lead me to lose track of, okay, make sure this food has been ordered or these groceries have been ordered so that food is ready for the next day. And then you realize, oh, that didn't get done. And now I'm going to bed later. And then you realize, oh, if I'm going to bed later, I need to either wake up, get less sleep to wake up on the same time, or get enough
Mm.
sleep and wake up later. And then you realize, okay, now that I woke up later, I need to go to the gym later. Oh, because groceries didn't get ordered. Now I have to eat takeout. And now, my macros are all over the place. And now
Mhm.
I don't feel as good as I could be feeling. And next thing you know, a lot of things have spiraled out of control. And it almost creates a negative momentum where the effects keep adding up. And there's almost, you need to stop that momentum
Mhm.
and, and take kind of a drastic reset in order to get things back on track, as
Mhm.
opposed to, and the longer you let that compound, the more drastic of a reset you need. And
Mhm.
so this idea of negative momentum that comes from the cycle of procrastination, I think also can be quite damaging when you look at it over the long period versus the positive cycle that you can create as well of positive momentum, of not procrastinating, closing all the different threads on time, and having a lot more peace. And so, even if maximizing your output in the external world is the goal, as long as you're looking over a long enough horizon of time,
Mhm.
working on your internal world actually has a lot of utility to it. This isn't something that you just sit at home and do for the sake of doing. It actually translates very effectively in how you show up in the external world.
Yeah, because when you do the internal work, what happens is you have one program that's running at full speed. So if we were to look at the average person's reality, they wake up, right? And let's think of this as like computer programs. So someone wakes up, a program comes up that's like check Instagram. Another program comes up, oh, I have a date with this girl in a few days. Oh, what should I do? This is like check Instagram takes 10% space, this takes 10% space. And then it's like, oh, I need to go to the gym after work. Okay, cool. That takes 10% of the space. And then they have all these small things that add up. And the core thing that they want to be doing only is left with like 40% of their own CPU, right? Their own mental energy. So then, even if they're running at full speed with their mental energy, the task at hand only take 40% of it. Whereas when you do the healing work, a lot of the time you spend worrying, thinking about stuff, planning, not strategically, but planning to avoid risks, like over planning so that the risks never happen, which actually comes from a lack of healing. You don't spend time on those things. So then you could spend 80% of your mental energy just working, which means actually you're not spending all your mental capabilities on the task at hand. So it feels more effortless, feels more peaceful, but you're getting twice the output because the level you focus from is completely different. And I think that applies to all types of learning. Like so many people try something once and they go, "Oh yeah, I've tried meditation, it just
Yeah.
hasn't worked." Yeah, that's right. The AI agrees again. Um, I've tried meditation, it hasn't worked. But it's not whether you tried something. It's how deep did you actually go? How deep did you actually study this subject? And I think a lot of people look at it as a binary, like, oh, I tried to build this habit, it didn't work. Okay, but what did you actually do? How long did you try for? What did you do when it didn't work the first time? Because for most people, the story is, I tried once, I expected, oh, if I meditate for 10 minutes, then I'm going to get into a bliss state. Well, that didn't happen. So I decided meditation doesn't work. And then I moved on. But those types of patterns and behaviors are exactly what keeps people stuck in these cycles. Is for a lot of people, they can't even imagine a reality in which they wouldn't have these extra programs that are running in the background because they're just not used to it. And I've seen this in some calls I've had is like when you ask people, okay, so do you think it's possible that these programs just no longer exist? There's a bit of doubt there for some people, right? Because it's almost like asking them, do you think the sky could be purple? That's what it feels like because they've never actually seen that reality to be true. And I think one of our core messages here outside of the information is to show you you can build a quiet mind through the power of TWIM, and then you can integrate fullness into it by doing your healing work. So you're not just sitting in the sky and emptiness, going into peaceful states, which is great, but you're also becoming a functional member of society because now you can show up in life fully. And I think when people procrastinate and get stuck in the cycles, in a 1, 2 year time horizon, the overall feeling is knowing you have more potential, but you're not actualizing that potential. And that has an energy to it. It's like a dark cloud at the top of your head that comes everywhere with you. And people can feel it. Women can feel it. Like when I was coaching dating, that's what we actually did. We turned the man into the guy who was working towards his potential because that's what speaks the loudest. It's not where you are or where you want to go. It's really how are you going about it? And are you actually taking the steps towards something? And, that's what makes you more peaceful. And that's also what makes you more charismatic to people.
Yeah. And to kind of draw parallels with some external world optimizations that I think people would accept and showing similarities in the interest of that. Let's say you're picking a gym, and I think we can all agree that spending a bit more money to go to a nicer gym that's a couple minutes walk away versus, saving, let's say, $25 to go to a gym that's a 45-minute walk. One is infinitely, in my opinion, better than the other. Also because you're saving time. And then when you go to the gym, because you don't have to like walk from one end of the gym to the other end of the gym to get the same weight of dumbbells for your exercises, and it just has the equipment you need, you're going to, it's going to be a lot simpler to achieve your fitness goals in the first situation where you have the gym that's close to you, that's nice, you enjoy going there, versus a gym that's 45 minutes away and you feel like every time you go to the gym, it's an uphill battle you have to
Mhm.
fight. And no, and obviously, both you can make both work, but it's quite clear that one of them is much, much more conducive.
Mhm.
And I think another example is like making sure your commute is a bit more comfortable so that when you get to the office, you actually are energetic and can work versus taking a commute that's just insanely long and tires you out. And, I
Yeah.
understand that there's costs that come with that, and um, not everyone can do that. But it's worth understanding that oftentimes in such situations, you can be to try and save $2, you're losing 20 because you're kind of losing out on all the positive gains that you'd get
Mhm.
from that activity. And I think while we can agree that these external world Optimizing your external environment is very important for your success. We rarely talk about optimizing our internal environment.
Mm-hmm.
And much like optimizing our external environment really can give us a lot of gains in our productivity, our life, so
Mm-hmm.
can optimizing our internal environment to be more peaceful. And, that's why we call it the hidden cost, because we rarely, so many times, it's like, oh, the 30 minutes of your meditation is 30 minutes I could be working. But really, it's the 30 minutes of meditation means that you get, maybe 3 hours of work out of your usual 2 hours of work.
Yeah.
And so by putting in those 30 minutes of meditation, you almost gain 1 hour because you're that much more productive.
Mm-hmm.
And typically the effects, at least for me, were a lot more. But, you know, we spend so much time optimizing our external world, but why don't we spend so as much time optimizing our internal world? Because that really has this hidden cost of more procrastination, chances of more burnout, as well, from what I found, as well as generally I've found as well that the happier I am, the more productive I am. And so I think it's very important to look at our inner world and see how can we optimize it so that we can build a life where we have the impact that we want to have.
Yeah. I think as you're listening to this or watching this, if you're asking yourself, well, that's great, but how do I actually do that? The first place to start is to look at your avoidance mechanisms. What do you do when you feel overwhelmed, or when you feel stressed, or when you feel irritated? And get as granular as you can get. As if you were debugging a program, try and debug your actual mind. So when I say this, I mean like, okay, I feel like, let's say I wake up, I realize I have to keep working on this bug from yesterday. Oh man, I don't know the solution still. Then I feel slightly hopeless. I don't know when this is gonna get fixed. And then I check my phone. And as I check my phone, I see some interesting things. I laugh, maybe see a cat video, or recently I've been seeing a lot of that Dancing Pedro. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, Pedro, Pedro,
Yeah,
Pedro,
Pedro, Pedro,
Pedro,
Pedro.
Pedro.
That one's hilarious, man. So if it's Pedro against your bug, of course you're gonna choose Pedro, right? And the way we can be more conscious around this is to go, what is Pedro helping me avoid? Like, what am I avoiding through this behavior? So that you become more aware of the cost of your own procrastination. Because the first step to changing anything is becoming more aware of it. Like so many times I was talking to I had a coaching call with a client yesterday, and he was a bit frustrated that he was struggling with, getting back into dating. That was a big thing for him. And he felt like he's stuck at such a simple step, which is just sending a message and asking someone out. And what I told him was like, so many times we have a problem and we want to jump into a strategic solution as fast as we can. But the deepest solution we can find will be more when we understand the problem deeper. And by looking into the internal world, we're building our own understanding of the problem itself so that the solution we come up with, it might take a longer time, but it will be permanent compared to this quick hack you could use to get to the outcome. So it's the same thing. The solution to any problem lies through understanding the problem deeply. And this is kind of like math, you know? Have you ever had this? I remember I had this in high school. Sometimes you look at a problem and you see a very easy solution, and you're like, oh, cool, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And maybe you do it very quickly. And then you realize you were tricked by the equation and that's the wrong answer. And you actually moved too fast because you thought, oh, I got this. But if you
Yeah.
stepped back for like 15 seconds, you could go, oh, that's not what I think it is. And I think people do that to their own problems in life, is they try to implement too quickly, especially, with the achievement-oriented society we have now. It's like speed is success loves speed, right? So people just act around that, but they don't realize actually spending the time understanding the problem, looking at the avoidance mechanism and going, what does this help me avoid? And then being able to look at that by finding a loving witness inside yourself without creating any shame or guilt around what this is helping you avoid. So it's this radical honesty that does not involve any guilt, which makes you a very functional person. Because now you don't waste time feeling shame and guilt, and you have all this extra time to put into your healing work and to actually do the task at hand.
Yeah. And, along the lines of avoidance cycles, I knew when I'd get overwhelmed and quite stressed, my first thing would be like, oh, if I know I'm working all night anyway, let me order some fast food as a quote unquote reward. And then once I eat that, I'll get back onto work. And, combining a high calorie intake with a very high stress level, um, not the best idea. But so much of it I realized was food was my avoidance mechanism and my happy feeling. And that's when I kind of started working through all of that,
Mm-hmm.
that's when my relationship with food became a lot healthier as well. And it's interesting because there's biological basis for this as well, where in times of stress, I was reading a paper, it creates appetite signaling, and it almost creates like this, from what I understood, it creates a little bit of this unsatiable feeling of hunger. But something that I really liked about the inner work was that even though that biology may remain fixed, whether you perceive that stress as stress to that extent, that's what you can change a lot of times. Because when you're more compassionate with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
one day of screwing up your macros, really in the grand scheme of things, not bad at all, right? And when you have a lot of self-love, you can be like, okay, it's just one day. This is what happened. This is what I'll improve, but it
Mm-hmm.
is what it is. Versus if you don't have that, it's easy to go, oh, I'm so this, I'm so that, and get really stressed out, like future projecting, um,
Yeah,
like all these Armageddon style images of yourself.
that's
Um,
right.
and so by building a lot more self-love, you can have the same stimuli externally, but your reaction to it would be different. And that's what's so powerful around a lot of these things. Especially, I
Mm-hmm.
remember you'd given me this practice of even things that are tasks that you don't like doing,
Mm-hmm.
just sit at it like a meditation. And every time the resistance comes up, you can 6R it.
Yeah.
And even that kind of fundamentally changed my relationship to the external activity and stimuli,
Mm-hmm.
which as a result, I wasn't getting as stressed out about things as much anymore, which,
Mm-hmm.
had positive downstream effects. And
Yeah.
so, well, let's give people a quick rundown of what the 6 R's are before we continue elaborating on this point.
Yeah, one of the simplest things you can do when you're facing a task that maybe you don't enjoy as much as I don't know, writing a cool program or whatever your favorite hobby is to look at it as if this is equanimity training. And the way you do that is the task itself can turn into a meditation. So your meditation object is whatever task is at hand. And whenever you feel your attention's being pulled away, whether it's you wanting to check your phone or even mental stories that come up like, oh, I can't wait to be done with this and get some ice cream later. That's gonna be good. Like that. That would be story I would have. Then we can go, never mind, relax. So when I say relax, it's relaxing the tension in the inside of your skull. Like imagine the difference between like really flexing your bicep versus just relaxing it and doing that with your skull. Smile. So smile in your eyes, on your lips, in your mind, and in your heart, and then come back to the task at hand. So that's kind of the process of using this task as an opportunity to build more equanimity. Because sometimes we may have tasks that we don't really care about. And sometimes we may have tasks we don't care about and will never do again, like going into a government's office, probably not the most fun thing. But if we can look at it and go, okay, this equanimity practice, we will have a gentler experience. Suddenly, we shifted the meaning around what this experience was going to be. So we actually feel more productive and more likely, because no one likes going into the government's office, if you're the one person who's happy about being there, telling people, hey, how are you doing? I hope you're having a good day. And you have this genuine energy of care about you, most of the time, people get your stuff done a lot easier. And so
Yeah.
this is where being a nice person or practicing this stuff isn't just an internal transformation, it carries out into the external world as well. Because a lot of the time, whether people understand energies or not, they can feel something different about you. And this is
Yeah.
where we're changing the feeling on the inside, but that also changes how people perceive us on the outside.
Yeah. And, even looking at it purely from this logical perspective, it's like, well, the other person is also sitting there trying to do their best. It's not like they created the entire system and they're
Right.
probably being like, hey, I'm here trying to help people and everyone just so annoyed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And maybe they feel like people are taking it out on them versus when you
Mm-hmm.
show up with a genuine warmth, um, they are more likely to reciprocate that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And something I really liked here is the I get to versus I have to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I caught myself sitting in traffic the other day and I was like, well, I get to sit in traffic as opposed to, be one of the pedestrians who has to walk in 45 Celsius heat in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
traffic. Same with even like doing documentation. I was like, I get to do this because I get to do this so I can set up all these cool things. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why I really like the power of I get to versus I should,
Mm-hmm.
um, because it really gives you a lot of gratitude for even day-to-day activities. Because again, even with like writing the hard program that we're procrastinating on or sending that email, it really is, yeah, I get to do that, because I have a job that allows me to live a life that I want to live,
Mm-hmm.
so it really is the I get to is a very powerful way of perspective shift. And then I found that when I can do that, you can also learn to just kind of bite the bullet and get the task done anyway. And that helps reduce procrastination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just bringing in a an energy of gratitude into the task changes the task at hand completely. And I think the first time I realized that was actually when I was studying at college in LA, and I took a trip to Colombia for 3 weeks. And I remember meeting people, and I met this one guy who was selling bracelets on the street. So when you go to downtown in the city that I was in, there's a lot of people trying to hustle you, right? You're a foreign person, you got money, they want the money, which I was a college student, so I didn't have money, but they didn't know that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sitting waiting for a friend to arrive, and this guy sits not necessarily next to me, but close to me. And he's like, hey, you want some bracelets? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, I'm good. And he's like, that's fine. Is it okay if I practice my English with you? And I felt something genuine about his energy. And I was like, sure, right? So we start speaking English. Eventually, the girl I was waiting on arrived, and we were right next to this outdoor pizza place. And I was like, hey, do you want to eat? Like, are you hungry? Not to the girl, but also to the guy selling stuff on the street. The girl didn't eat anything. No, I'm joking. We all ate together. Um, but anyway, the three of us are on this table, right? And I'm like, so how did you start learning English? And he goes, oh, I just watched some Netflix movies and then I practice. And the reason I come to the street at night on the weekends is to sell stuff, but also to keep practicing my English. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I ask him like, what's the motivation behind it? And he goes, yeah, if I learn English, I can teach people in my village to learn English, and that will be the opportunity to get them out of there. And he kind of gave me a name of the area he lived in, but I didn't know the area, like I'm visiting, right? So anyway, we have a good dinner with this guy. Eventually he leaves, and he was one of the happiest guys that I've seen. Just selling bracelets on the street, smiling, on his purpose, going about his life. After he left, I asked my friend, okay, like, where is this area that he's talking about? And she goes, that is the most dangerous area in the city. Like, you don't go into that area. So he was living in such harsh conditions, but this mission he had about bringing English back into his his village just gave him a source of meaning and happiness. And I remember in that moment just having this insight like, oh, our external circumstance does really not matter for our internal world. Like we think it matters, and in some ways it can matter, but it also doesn't have to matter. And I
Yeah.
think that perspective is what we can tap into when we go from I have to I get to. Because so many times we don't realize the things we get to do are actually gifts that are given to us, are experiences that we can learn from and grow from. And that's why it's one of the first trainings inside our community as well, is because like if you're presented to this work, this conversation, this podcast, then you get to listen to this. For some reason, YouTube algorithm thought like, cool, let's bring this out there, right? And I think with that perspective, all tasks feel a lot more natural to move through. And then because you're seeing a task more as a gift, you're more likely to get started rather than seeing it as a burden with the have to and going, oh no, I'm just going to check my phone instead.
Yeah. Or even like check out of the task and just do it half-heartedly. And then
Yeah,
next thing you know, it's like, what did I even send out?
yeah,
Um, and I think the external the external circumstances definitely do matter. And but what we do me and there's extreme ends of this argument, but a lot of times I think the way what was someone told me this that so even though pain may not be optional, suffering can be optional. And
right.
really the core of today's podcast was to invite people to look at their internal world, and especially in a world where it's all about hack, hack, hack. Like I was even looking at something around biohacking that came up on my Instagram feed. And I was like, isn't this just how we're supposed to eat? Like, why is this a hack when it's just like
Right.
how I grew up a lot of times, or why is getting sunlight a hack when just stuff like that.
What a hack.
Um, yeah, what a hack. Live like a regular person. Yeah, the ultimate hack.
Leave your
Um,
house and take a walk. Wow. Didn't really think of that one.
yeah, the modern biohacking stack. Um, but where was I going? In a world filled with external hacks and all these ideas of, oh, set up your desk in a different part of your room, or all
Mhm.
these things, we rarely pause to look at what our internal world looks like. Like,
Mhm.
how anxious are we feeling today? How happy are we feeling today? How fulfilled are we feeling? Um,
Mhm.
and because we don't do that, that ends up having a massive hidden cost on how we live our life and how we move through the external world.
Mhm.
And I think this is one line from a former client who said, how much easier is it to fully show up Monday morning when you've had that weekend with people you love, with people you enjoy spending and having a good time on your time off, as opposed to, a very lonely weekend where you just were ruminating on things that you could be doing or should be doing.
Yeah, it's uh it's a full difference. And I think just because we're talking about the internal world, we're also not about disregarding useful strategies in the external world. A few of strategies that have worked for me is my phone's black and white. It's so funny. Alex Hormozy made a short about this, and now people are like, "Oh, did you take this from Hormozy?" But Numer, I had this for like
Yeah.
5 years.
Your blog post on it, I think, from like back in the day.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. But it's been one of the biggest things that allowed me to see my phone doesn't have to be as appealing as people take for granted. So that's part one. Part two is most of my notifications are just turned off, apart from apps that require immediate attention, like Uber, like
Storm
DoorDash.
alert.
Yeah, Storm Alert. Well, actually, I might need to turn that one back on because I always forget my umbrella, which is great. But apps, that's like, okay, I need to know what's going on here. That's where I have notifications. Everything else, no notifications. Just those two things will make your phone a lot less appealing to begin with. And when you combine this awareness around what you're trying to avoid with the behavior, like even if you do those three things and you do nothing else, you'll be 90% more focused than most people.
Yeah. And to add to that, I guess the your musings on language have rubbed off on me as well. Because
Uh-oh.
um, this idea of when we say inner world, when we say healing, I wanna, this is something I is a bit of a what's it called, ick in Gen Z terms,
Right.
or pet peeve, is that people associate that with only like people associate that with seclusion and pontification and almost like a bit of sit at home, work on your feelings and do nothing. Versus when we talk about inner world healing, it's something that's intricately linked with how you show up in the external world as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I know, when you were coaching dating, a big thing was going and talking. to the woman that you're attracted to is also healing. Like
Mm,
going and taking that action and loving your fear and taking that action, that's also healing. So
mm.
healing isn't just something that happens in a basement, with five other men. Meditation, and spirituality. Um, um, wrong direction. But healing isn't just something that's solitary um, and passive. Healing is something that's more, when, at least in my opinion, a lot more integrated, a lot more about showing up in the world, showing up with love, getting that feedback, showing that feedback to your fears, and almost working through transforming your inner world that way. And
Mm,
that's why we chose to balance kind of shadow work with also strategy, because the idea is that strategy or shadow work is a force multiplier for all your strategy, meaning same strategy, better inner world, more effect. But then the more
mm.
action you take, the more shadows that it shows you.
Right.
Because the more I went out and, let's say, socialized, the more shadows I found in myself. And that was
Mm,
more like, okay, this is what I need to look at internally. So our external
mm.
actions actually do great at shining a light on different parts of our internal world. And
Yeah.
that's what I really love about taking on adversity, is that adversity shines a bright light on parts of us that need more love and need more
Mm,
acceptance and need more working through. And then the beauty of that is when we work through those, we can actually navigate adversity better, show up better in the world. So they have this amazing feedback loop um, that really kind of helps you move forward in life with a lot of peace.
yeah, one of the most powerful ways to discover hidden shadows is to actually expose yourself to a new situation or a new environment. And we both done that in many ways in terms of traveling, socializing with new people, going to dancing classes, going to jiu-jitsu class. So you can be healed if you just sit on your couch, but then you're healed in the environment of your couch. Whereas the more you expand your comfort zone, the more environments you can be, like you can really feel like, okay, I belong here and I'm fine here. And that's where, as you said, the external world can be a great discovery process for you to kind of find what's happening. And the approach that we're recommending is, instead of looking at the external world as a way to gauge your own performance and where you fit in playing this competitive game, just look at it with curiosity. Like, what would happen if I went and spoke to this person? How would I feel if I signed up for a dancing class? And whatever happens, you just see it with the loving witness and you go, hey, I did something that was hard for me today. That's good. And then you journal on what you discovered. Here are the beliefs that came up. Here's what I found out about myself. And then we can go back and we can actually look at the patterns underneath to see how we can incorporate healing into that process. And this is also where, if you're procrastinating so hard that you're constantly avoiding your inner world, what's going to happen is you won't even have time to do those side quests and sign up for these activities or prioritize and balance other parts of your life to discover your fullest potential. So, in that sense, those tiny moments of distraction, and procrastination, even though they are tiny in the moment, they're actually very big as you increase the scale of your time. And those are the things that prevent you from living up to your full potential. And when you even try to live that way, whether you're meeting your own expectation or not, you discover so much about yourself that eventually you get to your potential and you get more than what you thought you would get to. And every year, and this has happened to me every year for the past, I don't know, 7, 8 years is like every year you look back at the version from you a year ago and you don't even recognize that person. You're like, whoa, I used to do this or I used to think this. That's interesting. And, I've seen that happen with you as well, Namer. It's like every year your perspective evolves so much that you become a completely different person. And that's not linear growth, that's exponential growth. So every year you're actually spending running away from that, you've cut down you reaching that potential by miles because there's not going to be that exponential effect.
Yeah. And I think the fact that it's an exponential curve, the part that I think we've you explained it, I've seen you explain it to a lot of people when they've asked you questions along the same line, is like that exponential curve initially is like quite small, and then suddenly it um just skyrockets, right? And so initially, depending on which exact function you choose, but initially like it almost feels like the linear is winning. And on the exponential side, initially you can feel like nothing's changing. And then
Mm,
all of a sudden things would skyrocket. And I feel like the number of times you had to tell people, look, mate, you just started 1 month ago. Don't
mm-hmm,
don't ask me when things will change. Like stay at it for longer.
mm-hmm.
Um, but at the end, the people who do stay longer, the growth really becomes exponential, and then it's just upwards from there. And
Yeah,
I think the other point you made that to me also has a relation to this idea of selection bias is, or almost like conditioning on environment in
mm-hmm.
statistics, is you said if you only stay indoors and do a lot of, I guess, healing practices, but only indoors, then you'll only be healed in that environment. So it's this idea of external validity that depending on if you see an effect in one particular cohort or one particular type of population doesn't mean you should expect it to generalize to everyone.
Yeah,
So I know I saw like issues raised around this where a lot of studies were just done on undergrads, and
yeah,
they would like do a lab experiment in an undergrad setting and be like, oh, when we gave them like $5 versus $10 payoff, this is what the results showed, and this is why it's a valid psychological or economic like phenomena that should be considered a proper effect.
yeah,
Versus like, well, when you actually do it with people who are more either mature, there's more money on the line, or you're really changing the environment, it's harder to say whether that effect that you saw will generalize or not.
right.
And I think it's quite similar with the healing, is like it's quite easy to, or it's not necessarily, but it's one thing to be healed while sitting on the couch. It's another to
Mhm.
be fully healed and integrated and be able to show up in the world fully.
Right.
And I think that's where, some of the past situations that frustrated me with, some other people came up. And that's
Mhm.
something that I think is very important about this healing work, is that it's not just something that's meant to be done in the comfort of your home. It's an
Yeah.
active feedback process as you move through the world.
Yeah, and if someone's doing healing just at their home, they're not really healing. They're using healing as an avoidance mechanism, and they're using the language of healing to actually avoid the healing itself.
Let me check in with myself.
That's right. Yeah. Let me check in with myself before I make a decision.
Does this feel
Does
aligned?
does this feel aligned? Or sometimes people are scared of a decision and they'll find faults in the other person's behavior to not make
Yeah.
that decision because they want to still remain in their own head as the person who's intelligent. And I think that's what's unfortunate about people using healing language as a way to actually avoid the healing is it creates a bad reputation around what
Yeah.
healing means. And from our perspective, healing is when you show up for yourself internally and externally. Because a true, like, the
Oh
deeper you
yeah, the
understand
thumbs up.
yourself, yeah, the deeper you understand yourself and the deeper you heal. And when I say show up on the world, like, you don't need to be an extrovert who's always out there sharing love with people, whatever the expression of that means to you. But I can guarantee you that as you heal, most likely you are not going to want to just sit on the couch and meditate or sit on the couch and look internally because connection is a basic need that we have. And whether that's connection with your friends, connection with strangers, the expression of that might look different. But if you're if you're kind of, listening to this content, right? And you've listened to so many similar things before and you've been practicing at home for a while, maybe what you're avoiding is just fear itself. So it's more productive to just be out of the house, even take a walk or go somewhere, than to listen any more of this. And I think that's where people get into tricky situations where they feel like they're processing stuff, whereas really nothing has changed in their lives.
Yeah. It almost reminds me of the video of Alex Hormozy you sent me today, where he was like, "Yeah, I'm a big fan of paired KPIs and not just one individually."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's like, yeah, you want if how you feel on the inside was one KPI, you want to pair it with how much have you been showing up or how much have you been facing your fears as the other KPI, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to never face your fears and have the feeling very good inside. You don't want to end up in that situation. And then you don't want to end up in the other one as well, where you're facing all your fears, but feeling absolutely terrible inside all the time. You really
Yeah.
almost want to have these pairs that are increasing together.
Yeah.
And, he gave it in one of his more, he gave it in the context of number of views and revenue per customer or something like that, and how you want both of them to increase. And it's
Mm-hmm.
quite a similar story of having these pairs of internal KPIs and external KPIs and having them increase together is really what, in my opinion, is important to creating a fulfilling life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think for people watching, that comes down to looking at the core root of what you're trying to avoid with these different mechanisms of procrastination, looking at the cost of what that does. Man, the thumbs up is just on fire today. Looking at the cost of that, right? Because I was just talking to one of our other one-on-one clients, and he's like, "Yeah, I think I got passed up on this promotion because of, this not necessarily lack of quality, but this sweet spot in my work where I'm doing just enough, but not enough to stand out and get to that next level." And that was a 20, 25K a year increase in his salary. That's like 2K a month. When you think about it, an extra 2K a month that's costing him through these behaviors. And I think a lot of the time, people don't realize that's happening to them, right? Because they're used to the life that they're currently living. So they're not comparing themselves to the alternative reality and seeing the opportunity cost. So I think just looking at the opportunity cost of what would my life look like if I didn't have all these programs looking for my attention and I gave energy to all of this, and that got me exhausted and low energy. And instead, if people just, cleaned up those things and lived the life they want, then realistically, there's so much more upside. Because the truth is, very few people take the time to look inward and to actually bring that transformation to the outer world. So if you can do that, then whatever skill you're learning, whatever job you take, whatever people you're connecting with, you're going to stand out because these are the fundamentals of how to live a good, meaningful life where you're at peace, but you're also a positive member to people around you and to society.
Couldn't agree more.
Cool. Any final thoughts?
Um, no, everything that
What has
I
to
that
be
was
done
kind
had to
of
be done.
yeah, what needed to be said has been said.
Yeah,
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
that's right. That's right. Cool. Thank you guys for listening. If you guys want our help with this and you want to be a part of our data-driven actualization community, where we help you heal your internal world and build courage and capability in the external world through coaching, community, private modules, go on Instagram at Data Driven Actualization, send me a DM, and then we'll get back to you with the details and how that looks like so you can make your own decision. Outside of that, if you join this or joined, if you enjoy this,
Enjoyed.
that's right. Language breaks down again. If you join this on this podcast and enjoy the podcast, then drop a thumbs up. Man, the thumbs up didn't work this time.
Yeah. When we needed to.
Yeah, just when you need him the most, he disappeared. Drop a thumbs up, subscribe, and any topic suggestions, please let us know. This is Ege,
This is Numer.
and this is the Data Driven Actualization Podcast. Thank you for watching.